Our next speaker, and I'm really glad to have her with us here, is Amy Mahn. She is an international policy specialist in cybersecurity, and I think one of the topics that really attracted a lot of interest and where many people and companies got really concerned is this topic of cybersecurity in times of COVID-19, where people started working from home without much preparation. So it is quite understandable that many organizations try to improve the cybersecurity measures, and I think NIST, where Amy Mahn is working right now, also made an effort to do this. But Amy is also working in the international relations field regarding cybersecurity. Among other things, she also worked for the Homeland Security affairs in international. And Amy, I'm really keen to learn more about cybersecurity considerations for telework, which I think is an important issue, and you have to unmute your mic yourself. Amy, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you again to everybody for having me today. This has been a wonderful opportunity, and it's really great to be among such great panelists and participants asking great questions, and I know I am definitely learning a lot, and again, I'm really excited to be here. Eric mentioned I work at the National Institute of Standards and Technology under our U.S. Department of Commerce, and a lot of our focus is working to help cultivate trust in technology, and that is an issue that is increasingly becoming important in these times. With everything going on, Eric mentioned, more people are moving towards remote work, and a lot of operations are taking place online. So we've really been trying to step up the types of resources and things we're developing to try to help people safely and more securely use this type of technology, especially as people are using it in new and different ways that they may not have been before, not even just for work, but in personal use as well, especially since people aren't always able to connect now with family and friends and might be using more virtual ways. Even some of these things I'm about to describe today could even be helpful for that as well as for work. I'm going to share my screen, and apologies, I may not talk about everything on these slides and talk a little bit off of it as well and provide some links for further information, and definitely happy to follow up with anything else afterwards. At NIST, we are a non-regulatory agency, which does really give us a lot of flexibility and have the opportunity to have more candid discussions with our partners in industry and internationally, of course, to hear about the types of problems they have as they're using technology or as they increasingly start putting their types of critical infrastructure online. So all of that feedback has been very important for us, and that helps us to continually update our guidance. And as Eric mentioned, I work in international engagement on our different cybersecurity and privacy documents, and that feedback that we get as we work with partners, especially outside of the United States, is very helpful as we face a lot of the same issues, and learning about those types of approaches and how others are seeing it really helps us with our guidance. And in fact, last fall, I was very lucky. I was able to spend 6 weeks on a detail in Vienna to work on cybersecurity policy issues, and had a chance to meet with a lot of stakeholders in the cybersecurity policy landscape. And it was very beneficial to see what types of approaches were there and bring some of that back and share and exchange information on approaches. So I've really appreciated that. And that's why, again, very excited to continue similar discussions today. Sorry, I'm trying to get the slide to move. Hoping the next slide is coming up. Security and privacy. Apologies, has the slide progressed, or am I having issues on my end? I'm hoping the security privacy slide is showing and has some links to some updated guidance we've put out in the form of blogs to try to collate some of the guidance that NIST has already put out there regarding how to telework and increase security of mobile devices. Again, a lot of this is becoming more timely in the current situation, and we want to make sure to bring to the forefront things that we have available, and of course welcome feedback so we can continue to learn what types of issues people are having that may not have been so prevalent before, and be sure to update our guidance. One area we've also been looking at is virtual meeting security. Again, a lot more people have been working from home, but something that we try to always keep in mind and encourage people is to use common sense and do a lot of things that they would keep in mind if they were working in their office, but just take into account how those considerations and risks might be different now working in a more virtual digital setting. For instance, if you're in an office and you're about to have a sensitive conversation, you might close your door and make sure people aren't listening. And people need to take those same types of precautions and make sure the calls they're having now from their homes allow for those same types of precautions, trying to limit who's on, or if you see someone who's there that's not supposed to be there, taking steps to remove them. Similarly, people are used to meeting in a conference room, and again, you can very easily make sure people who aren't supposed to be there aren't getting in, but we see that people sometimes might forget this as they're working virtually. And again, also the information you're sharing, it might be easy in an office setting. If you say something that maybe shouldn't have been shared or was a little bit sensitive, trying to make sure that if people end up forgetting that by lunchtime or next week, it might be a little bit harder to retrace, but you can't always put the toothpaste back in the tube or unring a bell. So keeping that consciousness in mind is very paramount to make sure you're doing some of your work in newly done online operations more securely. So we have put out some guidance to try to remind people of these simple things and hope that that can be useful. And again, always welcoming the feedback to make sure if there are issues we hadn't perceived now that people are starting to work online more, that we take that into account. Another slide with, again, just basic telework security things to keep in mind. Try to put them in more physical concepts of building a wall, things like making sure that you are updating your device and putting the proper security protocols on it. And we always see that there's a balance and issue trying to see the trade-offs with security and convenience. Sometimes people might be about to make an important phone call and then realize, oh, their phone needs to install an update. Knowing that that's going to make it unusable for 10, 15 minutes, they might put it off till later, but definitely like to encourage people to make sure that at some point they do that and take those steps, because there are a lot of known vulnerabilities out there, and it's very easy for someone to exploit something that's well known, and taking those steps, while they might be inconvenient, can ultimately result in better security. In addition, we also know that we can't always completely eliminate the risks and make things 100% secure, but just even taking little steps or basic minimal security things can help increase the type of work you do and keep it from being accessed by those who don't want to see it. For instance, that's why I said plugging the holes, making sure you're doing those different types of steps, and also making sure to have strong passwords. Some people may not even change it from 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever a default password is, which makes it a lot easier to break into. And we've even seen instances in past examples where devices, not even just for work with computers and phones, but things like DVRs or essentially any type of device that can connect to the internet, people can break into and then connect them into a botnet and collectively harness that greater amount of power to do malicious things. We've seen instances of Twitter and Reddit being taken down because many cell phones and DVRs that didn't have strong passwords were connected and used to do this. So we again encourage people, think about those trade-offs. Security can be a bit inconvenient, and we've seen in instances like that someone might say, oh, well, my movie is still streaming, so even if they know their DVR is part of a botnet, they might not be concerned because it's still functioning, they can watch their movie. But it's always very to try to encourage people to be mindful of these broader aspects and know that even if your device is working, if it is part of something that's causing greater harm, then it might be best to try to turn it off or take steps to mitigate and help keep it a bit more secure. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some approaches that we've already started and have in place, and some of those approaches are still very relevant in current times today and have a lot of good lessons that we should be keeping in mind. But of course, understanding that things are changing, we're always trying to update and make this guidance more relevant. What I'm showing now on the screen is our cybersecurity framework, and I won't go into too much discussion of what it is, but in a great overview is just that there are 5 different functions that we've identified through talking with stakeholders, not just in our government, but within industry and internationally, about steps that could be taken to manage the cybersecurity risks to critical infrastructure, or essentially, what are the different risks that come from a digital perspective when you're operating something physical because it's connected to the internet, since those are new and unique risks, or as we were putting this together. So hopefully some of those lessons learned from back when we did the first version of the framework in 2014 might be helpful today. Functions I've listed there are identifying the types of risks or trying to identify what assets you have that might be at risk because they're connected and operated in a digital manner, protecting those things that you've identified to be at risk and different controls that you can use to try to make them a bit more secure, detecting when something has happened and just noticing if something's not functioning correctly or doing something that it's not supposed to, being able to recognize that and then go into the proper steps to mitigate it, which is the next one for respond. And of course, recover, the steps that you can take to try to restore those critical infrastructure services, try to get your device or computer or whatnot operating more functionally and more securely. Itself, the core is that set of 5 functions that I identified. And again, underneath them are several different types of controls or actions that can be taken to try to achieve that function of better protecting devices or critical infrastructure, detecting when something happens and whatnot. But the framework itself is meant to be more of a risk-based approach, and rather than a prescriptive list of things that may not always apply to all people in all organizations in all situations, more so an approach where someone can look at it and see what are these different types of actions that are most impactful and meaningful to me based on my organization's risk, the different requirements I have to follow, the different needs that I have, and then letting them look through and put together what we call a profile that shows here are the things that are important to us and the steps that we'll take to mitigate those different digital risks. And we found that this has been a bit helpful, especially if there are small and medium businesses who may not be able to implement or do a lot of these costly cybersecurity controls. They may not have the staff to do so, but this gives them a good first step and at least gives them a common language to talk about the risks that they're facing and steps that they can take. So that is an approach that we continue to recommend because everyone is facing new and different challenges during these times, and flexibility is definitely important to be able to manage those risks. And as Eric mentioned earlier, we engage a lot internationally on our different cybersecurity and privacy approaches, and that collaboration very much helps us in terms of refining and updating and making our products more useful. I wanted to talk about a couple examples where we've seen this be very helpful with our cybersecurity framework. Back when it first came out in 2014, Italy was actually one of the first countries we saw to adapt some of those concepts, that whole identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, and put it into their national policy for cybersecurity. And we've seen some other instances where some of that language has appeared in countries' NIST directive requirements for operators of essential services. So it's been encouraging to see that these concepts, as we had hoped, were not just something that we use within the US, but things that can scale and be used outside of the United States and things that can really have more of a global impact rather than something that we do not want to be seen as US-centric. We now have different translations available of the framework. The Japanese were the first to do that, so we have theirs as well as the Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, and increasingly more different translations, which we hope will help with that approach. Better than I can explain it today, having it available in native languages has definitely been helpful for us as we share and talk about this approach. And again, it's been helpful for us to see how others have used things in ways we might not have thought of. So again, we're curious to see during these times if any of these approaches might be helpful, where there might be gaps and challenges, and then get that feedback so that we can continue to provide the types of resources that help in these types of times. I'll skip over, I'm just including some links to these since I know I'm going through them very fast. And the second one that I wanted to talk to, sort of a complementary approach to the cybersecurity framework that I described, is our privacy framework, which was just released in its first version of January of this year, also developed in that same collaborative process as the cybersecurity framework, getting information from stakeholders in government, industry, academia, and internationally about the different types of privacy risks that they faced and what steps they thought might be helpful in a separate framework from the cybersecurity one to help address them. I'm hoping this slide is showing with the Venn diagram. With the cybersecurity framework, a lot of those issues, again, were focused with operating in a more digital environment, and when your physical critical infrastructure is now operating online, what are those different types of risks, especially to the loss of confidentiality and integrity and availability of information. But what we were hearing, and some of these might be relevant today, is there are different risks out there that really couldn't be classified as a cybersecurity incident or risk associated with losing that type of information, but rather something that resulted from the proper or seemingly good use of data processing, but was just an unintended consequence. One example we use is a smart meter that's on a home that measures energy use, and it might be functioning properly. No one has hacked into it or changed it or compromised it in any way. It's doing what it's supposed to do in providing a service and a benefit, but someone could take that information and make calculations about when are people in that house based on the energy usage and when are they not, if the meter is showing that there's nothing happening at that moment in terms of energy use. And that type of information could be used for plotting when is a good time to rob that house or something malicious to that effect. So that's something that's really more of a privacy risk, and those types of things weren't really addressed square on in our cybersecurity framework. So that's why we took a different approach and really looking at privacy and how those types of risks are a bit different and how those might have to be identified and managed and mitigated in different ways. So while it does look similar in structure, it is a different set of guidelines, but again, very complementary to our cybersecurity approach. And that's something that we're hoping will be helpful as well, and not really seen as a compliance checklist, but rather a menu of options and different steps that could be taken in trying to mitigate different privacy risks that could arise as people are working more from home or operating more devices digitally and spending more time in their house. So hoping it can be a helpful set of guidance and things to keep in mind. So there's information on that as well. I just wanted to close by again saying these are definitely different times where there are some unique challenges arising in terms of managing cybersecurity and privacy risks. And while we do have resources that we hope to bring to bear that can be helpful as people are navigating these times, it is definitely also an opportunity for us to learn and see what other issues might come up as people are becoming increasingly digital in their operations, and opportunity to share and talk about challenges people see in that area, and again, helping us to update the ways that we try to mitigate and address those challenges. I think I'll stop there with issues and time, but thank you again for this opportunity and really looking forward to questions and further discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you. A really important topic, certainly, and I think many people have realized just how important it is nowadays. I have a short question because, I mean, you are representing a standardization organization. So I guess usually what you're doing is addressed towards companies and other organizations, but not so much towards the consumer. Now, but what you have shown us today looks like something that everybody should take into account. So what are your, who's the target audience, and what are your communication channels usually for what you're doing?
The type of work we do, and again, thank you for that question. We engage a lot bilaterally or in multilateral forums, and we try to gather stakeholder input, not just where I'm based out of Washington, D.C. in the US, but we try to get input from people all over the country and internationally in the form of workshops. Unfortunately, we were supposed to have one in May of this year where we would gather stakeholders in industry, academia, and internationally to talk about how they use products like the cybersecurity or privacy frameworks and other NIST guidance, and get their feedback and implementation lessons learned, and again, put that into our update process. In general, we're not always able to go everywhere in person that we would like, but try to find these ways, increasingly virtual now, to stay in touch with others and share information. But typically, yes, a lot of that is both through direct engagement, but also in standards development organizations. I know we just heard a great presentation from IEEE, but we work with them and ISO, IEC, and IETF and other standards development organizations to put elements of these approaches that I described as contributions into these bodies, so we can work collaboratively with partners there to develop different types of standards and guidelines that reflect these types of approaches, and those can be available globally. I know sometimes people might not pick up a document if it has NIST or US government in any way on it, but we've actually taken things like the cybersecurity framework and put it into a technical specification development process in ISO, and hope that maybe it's available as an ISO document. Someone who might not look at just the NIST cybersecurity framework would see this ISO document and at least get some of the elements of the approach that might hopefully benefit them from a security perspective.
All right, thank you very much. Now, there was a short comment by someone saying that considering cybersecurity, your Gmail email occurs on the screen, but on the other hand, this is a trusted environment, so probably it's okay.
Yes, and operating on, yeah, a personal laptop and
right.
not a work device at the moment, so apologies.
Thank you, Amy. I don't see another question popping up. If that's, I hope that's correct. If that's okay, thanks again, Amy. Thanks for participating in this important topic.